What's going on, guys? Welcome to another video. So today I wanted to talk about why dragon types have suddenly become the strongest type in competitive battles in Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. Now it sounds weird to say this for me, who's played, since Red and Blue originally came out, but during the time when I was playing competitive Pokemon super seriously, dragon types were always considered the best type in the game. But slowly over time, they started adding fairy type and other ways to kind of weaken dragon relative to the other types. The dragon has not really been a prominent part of most metagames. Now there have been times, like during early Sword and Shield, thanks to Dynamax, we've seen Pokemon like Dragapult and Duraludon be complete forces, but we haven't seen like a whole group of different dragon types dominating a metagame at any one time. So what has caused this change in Scarlet and Violet? Well, the easy answer is terastallization. But it goes a little bit deeper than that, and there are some that really terastallization isn't the reason that they are so good. So let's start with, I got my trusty notepad up here. Let's start with Roaring Moon, one of the new Paradox Pokemon that is based off of Salamence. So Roaring Moon, Dark and Dragon type, weak to Fairy, as are all of the dragons. But thanks to terastallization, it can get rid of that 4 times weakness to Fairy, either making it neutral by turning into a flying type, or by turning into a steel type, making it resistant. So that is one area where we see terastallization really help. So I'll put flying, steel. So that's one example. Now we don't know, when are we going to have access to using the Paradox Pokemon and the Legends in competitive Pokemon? Is it going to be immediately? Is it going to be, a few months from now? We don't know yet, but when those Paradox Pokemon are legal, expect Roaring Moon to be extremely common because it is very strong, especially when combined with terastallization. What else do we have? Well, we've got an oldie, Dragonite, a Pokemon that has long been forgotten. It's been power crept. It just hasn't been good in ages. But now suddenly it is at the very top of all the different metagames. Whether it's involving the Paradox Pokemon or not, Dragonite is extremely strong. And again, it is all thanks to terastallization because Dragonite gets extreme speed. So if you use a choice band on Dragonite combined with that stab extreme speed after terastallizing into a normal type, with the ability it has where it can't even be intimidated to lower its attack, its extreme speed is dealing absolutely insane damage off its very high base attack. So Dragonite, coming out of nowhere to be a very top Pokemon, probably most people didn't really see this coming, but it's very cool to see as an old school player myself, seeing some of these old Pokemon rival some of the new ones. So, what else do we have? Well, if Paradox Pokemon and the different legends that Scarlet and Violet introduced are not allowed in the official circuit right at the start, well, there are a number of other dragons that become immediately top tier. Let's start with Hydreigon. Hydreigon, and again, just like Roaring Moon, it is Dark and Dragon type, so quad weak to Fairy, but it can take advantage of terastallization in the same kind of way and turn into a steel type. Combine that with its levitate and the number of weaknesses that it has drop down even more. It also gets flash cannon, much like Roaring Moon gets Iron Head, to actually take advantage offensively of that steel type terastallization. Hydreigon also, thanks to its original typing, has some other good matchups, right? Against Pokemon like Gold and Go, it's got that stab Dark Pulse that is really going to help, especially considering that if it stays unterastallized, it resists Shadow Ball, and if it does terastallize into a steel type, now you resist Make It Rain. So, Hydreigon, another Pokemon that is going to be extremely common. What else do we have for dragon types? Well, we got Garchomp, another kind of old school dragon. Garchomp is again very good. Now, the reason for this is a little bit less because of terastallization. Now, terastallization does help it a lot, which we'll talk about. But one of the big problems that Garchomp has been the power creep in regards to its ground typing, because Landorus Therian form just completely outclasses it and has ever since it's been released into the game. But we don't have Landorus T in Scarlet and Violet, so Garchomp immediately going to become a top tier Pokemon, especially in a metagame with a lot of setup. You can give Garchomp Amulet, or what's it called? The Clear Amulet, not Amulet Coin, Clear Amulet. That way it's not going to be weak to Intimidate. Grimmsnarls can't even use Scary Face against it. So Garchomp can safely get a setup with Swords Dance, and it's going to be very hard to stop, especially since it is already quite fast. But probably the best terastallization type for Garchomp is actually that ground type to boost its earthquake damage even further and get rid of that dragon type to make fairy type moves weaker, as well as ice moves and other dragon moves. So you can kind of remove some of those weaknesses that dragon brings along and play up to Garchomp's strength, which is that fast stab earthquake. Now you'll notice there's kind of a trend here, right? Getting rid of the dragon typing is actually what's making these dragon types so incredibly powerful, which is kind of ironic, but that's one of the really interesting things about terastallization. It makes a lot of Pokemon that previously maybe weren't so viable just because of their type, it actually can make them quite viable, which is very cool to see. So let's continue. Let's get to some of the newer age Pokemon. We've got Dragapult. Now, Dragapult was really good in Sword and Shield, as we all know, and it continues to be the same in Scarlet and Violet, but a little bit different. In Sword and Shield, it often took advantage of Dynamax, especially combined with like weakness policy. You could easily Shadow Sneak your own Dragapult, give it some big boosts, and then thanks to Dynamax with its monster HP stat, making it actually bulky enough to take pretty powerful, super effective attacks, it could then start dishing out massive damage, especially with that Max Ghost, which would also lower defenses, enabling Dragapult to do more damage in future turns, as well as its ally. So Dragapult just incredibly powerful. Not going to be the same level of power anymore in Scarlet and Violet, but it is still quite good. You can still run a very offensive set, whether it's Life Orb with a special attacking variant, whether it's a Choice Band physical attacking variant. There's a lot of ways to run it, and much like how you saw a little bit in Sword and Shield, it can also be a little supportive. It gets the screens, it gets Will-O-Wisp, right? We even saw it use Surf on your allied Colossal at times in Sword and Shield, so there's a lot of things Dragapult can do that make it really good. Last, let's continue with even newer Pokemon. Let's talk about Tatsugiri. Now this one doesn't count as much because the whole point of Tatsugiri is to get eaten by its ally Dondozo, but the thing that makes that combo so incredibly powerful is the fact that Tatsugiri is not a completely useless Pokemon on its own. And when Dondozo actually goes down, Tatsugiri is still left standing and can still dish out quite a bit of damage because it does have base 120 special attack, which is quite good. And Water and Dragon is actually pretty good typing, especially offensively. There's not a lot that resists both of those attacks. So Tatsugiri, while not really taking advantage of terastallization, it can in some scenarios, but for the most part, its gimmick is getting eaten by Dondozo and having Dondozo do all the work. It's just that Tatsugiri happens to be Dragon type, and its stats and typing and move pool happen to be good enough where it's not just complete dead weight all on its own. Alright, now aside from these 6, you might think, okay, well, what else is there for Dragon types? Now there's a few more Dragon types that I think actually have potential, while they're not at the top of the metagame, like these 6 Pokemon would be, right? You're going to see these Pokemon a lot. There are some others that are actually quite good and have, I would say, quite a bit of untapped potential. So you are going to see these other Dragon types quite a bit too. I think regular Salamence, you know, in a scenario where Roaring Moon is not in the format, I think regular Salamence too has some advantages where it can run a similar kind of Steel type terastallization. It can set up with Dragon Dance. It also gets Iron Head. So I think there's a lot of things there. Intimidate too, while not as good this year as it has been in previous generations, I think Salamence, you know, definitely seen as an option. You know, around the same level as if you were to use a Steel type Dragonite that would also have Dragon Dance in order to set up. I think Salamence can do a similar thing, holding the Clear Amulet. So that is an option, and having the Intimidate does free you up where you wouldn't have to use Arcanine as a Fire type, or even the Fire type Tauros. You could go for another Fire type that doesn't have Intimidate because you've already got Intimidate covered on Salamence. So I think Salamence is something that would definitely see play. Another is a new Pokemon, Cyclizar. Now this one's really interesting because it's not going to take advantage of terastallization, much like, you know, Salamence would here with Steel type. Let me just mark that down. And, you know, Garchomp, Hydreigon, Dragonite, Roaring Moon, they're all taking advantage heavily of the terastallization. Even Dragapult, to some extent, can boost its damage with it. But Cyclizar is there more for that new Shed Tail move, which sets up a massive substitute, and then it U-turns out, transferring that substitute to a Pokemon in the back. So for a setup-oriented strategy, Cyclizar could be quite good. Is it going to be top tier and used on kind of good stuff teams? No, probably not, but on setup-oriented teams, maybe something with like a Belly Drum Azumarill, or who knows, it's still a very unexplored Pokemon because it's brand new. Cyclizar does have quite a bit of potential there, so that's cool to see. And then last, another new Pokemon, we have Baxcalibur. Baxcalibur, I think that's how it's spelled. Baxcalibur is an interesting one because Ice Dragon, we've seen it a bit with Kyurem. It's gotten some use in some of the restricted legendary formats, but Baxcalibur does have an interesting ability where any fire type moves power it up, and it's also immune to burn, which is quite common. So Baxcalibur, I'd say, does have some potential there. It's good against Arcanine in that, you know, it can't get burned. Flare Blitz, while it can damage it, it's going to power it up. And then against Amoonguss, it can deal massive damage. So I think there's some potential with Baxcalibur. Is it at the level of, you know, these first 6 dragon types that I listed? No, it's probably more in this scenario where you're going to see it, but it's probably not going to be a meta Pokemon that's on, you know, so many different teams. But it's one that's definitely good enough and going to see play. So that's 9 different dragons that are completely viable in the official competitive circuit. So that is great to see if you're a fan of dragon types. And even if you're not, I mean, this is a sign that you're going to see this across the board. Terrestrialization really does allow for a lot of different Pokemon to be viable. And as a Pokemon fan in general, if you ever tune into the official Pokemon streams, sometimes you see the same teams, the same Pokemon just over and over again. But it definitely looks like Terrestrialization is going to lead to a lot more variety, which is really cool if you're a fan of just competitive Pokemon in general. So that's going to be it for the video, guys. Hope you found it interesting. Subscribe if you're not already, and I'll see you in the next video.